Michigan high school hockey season is less than 2 weeks away. God, I can't believe that. I've ran through previews of 6 different conferences, leagues, and associations already this month. So take a back at the last 2 episodes of the podcast if you want to get caught up on the championship predictions, players to watch from all of those conferences. And obviously, join us this week and beyond for more previews and picks and players to come. This week, I've got 3 more conferences on deck. I'll be taking a closer look at the Big North Conference that spans from Traverse City to Alpena in northern Michigan. We'll also take a look at the Great Lakes Conference in the UP for all my listeners and viewers in God's country. Thank you very much. And we'll wrap things up here with the Saginaw Valley League just up the road from me in the mid Michigan area. So, just before we get started, before we get into any of that, do me a huge favor here. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, be sure to follow, rate, and review. I love doing what I'm doing here with the podcast and the website and getting to talk high school hockey and all those things. But I can't do any of that without your support. So thanks in advance. I appreciate it. Subscribing to the program goes a very long way. So thank you very much. Now let's talk some hockey. We'll get into it here. We're gonna start things off in the Big North, like I mentioned. 6-team conference in Northern Michigan. You got your Traverse City schools, TC West, TC Central. You got Petoskey, Cadillac, Gaylord, and Alpena round out the field here in the Big North. There's been a different champion atop the Big North for 4 straight seasons now. No one has repeated as champ since 2021 when TC Central went back to back. In fact, the only team to repeat as Big North champions in the past 12 years, that's as far back as records go on the Michigan High School Hockey Hub. The only team to repeat as conference champions is Traverse City Central. So, with all of that in mind, factoring in TCC happens to be your reigning defending champion at the top. If anyone is capable of repeating, it's the Trojans. So as we're looking at things this season, they've also kind of positioned themselves to do just that, I think, this winter and position themselves as a real strong candidate to repeat as conference champions. When you look at getting key returners like Graham Peters and Cole Hersberg back up front. Your leading goal scorer from a season ago was Arthur McManus from the blue line. He's set to return as well. Kyle Knapp back in goal for the Trojans. There's a lot of key returners coming back. I mentioned this team was very young last season. And here, so you're getting a lot of those guys coming back for this season as well. Just 5 seniors on the roster last season. I mentioned that. And I feel like that squad last year endured a lot of growing pains. I'll call it that throughout the season, putting together a 13-14-0 record. And even with those, we'll call it struggles, I think they still managed to win the Big North for the 8th time in the last 12 years. And I think this season's Trojan team has positioned itself, like I said, to be a real player on the state level this time around. They were able to still, in the face of those struggles and challenges last year, we're still able to be pretty dominant in conference play. There was the non-conference that maybe struggled with a little bit or had those learning opportunities and being forced to play fast, being forced to play outside their comfort zone and do some things like that. I think this time around, you're able to capitalize on those learning lessons, those experiences, and guys like Peters and Hersberg and a lot of the young guys on this team are in a position now to take that next step in their development process and really propel Central to be a contender on the state level this year and beyond. Peters is a guy, I think he's the real deal. I wrote on the blog on pdspicks.com. I think he's one of the smarter players in the game today. His hockey IQ is visible from the stands. You can see how smart this kid is on the ice and how he's thinking through the game as the play unfolds. I think he's a guy who can play from anywhere and impact the game in a variety of ways. I remember, there was a play last season that really stood out to me, or a moment, I should say, not necessarily a play, but he was a center, right? So he lines up for the face off. I believe it was an offensive zone face off, and ref ends up throwing him out of the circle. So he swaps places with his winger, and now he's lined up in a position he's not typically comfortable in, and he's having to do it on the fly in the heat of the moment. And so he's switching spots with his winger. Ref drops the puck, and Peters is the first guy on his toes, jumps into the scrum, and comes away with a loose puck. And I just felt like that play told me everything I needed to know about this kid. There's a lot of wingers, natural wingers, who don't jump off of draws with that much intent and that much purpose. They kind of stand there flat-footed, thinking faceoffs are just the center's job, and the puck's going to get dropped, and the center's going to pull it back to the defenseman, like very rudimentary structured. And it just couldn't be farther from the truth. When I was at Livonia Stevenson, that really got ingrained in me as we were kind of coaching up the kids, that faceoffs are a team stat. It's not a center stat who, what's his face-off win percentage. No, it's a team stat. And that means all hands on deck. That means wingers have to be on their toes, chomping at the bit, ready to jump into that face-off circle. Because there's a lot of instances where the centers get tied up and that puck sits there. That's an opportunity for wingers to jump in and get involved. Not enough guys do that, especially at this level. And it's such an easy thing to do, I think, to just go as hard as you possibly can for those 2 seconds and get that puck. Like, good things will happen. And all it takes is just that little bit of effort right at the start of a shift. So for me, Peters just kind of gets it. Wherever you put him, he's going to make a play. Center kind of being his natural position last year, or where I saw him play the most. Doesn't matter. He's busting his butt and contributing from the wing. I think he's smart enough that if you threw him in for a shift on defense, I think he's good enough to get that drawback, get it on his stick, go D to D, and execute a breakout out of a D zone faceoff as well. So he just understands the game from all angles, and I think that's a tribute to him. And I also think it's his coaches too. Chris Givens is one of the best in Michigan high school hockey. And he's been doing it maybe longer than anybody in the game today. One of the more tenured coaches in Michigan high school hockey. So you put him with guys like Herzberg. Blake Weaver was another guy I liked last year. He was a freshman who had 10 points last season. So that's what I meant. This was a very young Central team with a lot of underclassmen coming back that are still underclassmen today. Central, I think the way they're built is really structured for sustained success. And while, like I said, they were young last season and maybe still young this season to a degree, but so is the rest of the conference. If you look around, Alpena, West, some of these other teams in the conference are also pretty young. Alpena is kind of the other heavy hitter in the conference, I would say. It's kind of come down to Central and Alpena the last couple of years. Alpena returns as many as 5 of their top 6 scorers from a season ago, as well as Parker Schultz in net. And Schultz is a guy I liked a lot. I only caught maybe a game or 2 of his last season. He's a little bit small, but most freshmen are when they're playing a varsity sport at any level. So what stood out to me was his technique and his footwork. He was very textbook in his movements. So I think there's a lot of pieces to his game that set him up to be a pretty promising prospect over the next couple of years as he continues to develop. Brody Misiak, Ethan Walker, those guys were also freshmen and also major contributors for the Wildcats. 17 and 16 points respectively for those two last season. If those guys take a significant step in year 2, as I expect from most prospects after getting a year of experience under their belts, they add a ton of value to this team. On top of Garrett Hamp and Gavin Winterstein, they're fantastic. But a lot of teams have a duo like Hamp and Winterstein. Michigan high school teams have success at the state level when you have that depth and you have guys outside of your quote unquote big guns that can produce. Alpena has a lot of those guys up and coming. last season, like I mentioned, with Musiak and Walker, who are now in a position to play a larger role. And you couple that with Hamp and with Winterstein, and this team could be very dangerous this season, not just at the conference level, but at the state level as well. Uh, conference championship likely comes down to, like I mentioned, Central and Alpena. That's been the case the last couple of years, but I got to spend some time talking about TC West as well. They've got potentially the best defenseman in the conference when you look at it, and maybe one of the best in the state. Period. With Kallen Ray, he had 28 points in 25 games last season on a West team that I think was just a little bit below 500, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to double check, but he's played some of his best hockey in the last month of the season. Last season, I believe picked up points in like 8 of his last 10 games or something like that down the stretch. Really picked up his play in February and beyond. And then that snowballed into playing for Team Michigan Juniors last spring and was a major contributor there. And then that snowballed into this fall, and he was a top performer in the MDHL. So I just don't know. Not many have had as good of a year as Kallen Ray has when you look at his last 12 months or so of youth hockey. So the Titans get Ray back for another year. They get Alonzo Ovate back in net as well. Ovate played 21 games for them last season. Pulled off wins against Mona Shores, Traverse City Central in a big rivalry game that he made 37 saves in. Had a 41 save performance in a win over Saginaw Heritage. Had another win over Midland Dow. This is a kid who's shown an ability to pull off some of those bigger wins on West's schedule. And he may not garner some of the attention statewide as some other counterparts there. But when you have Ovate and you have Ray, those are two pretty big building blocks for West to kind of work with there. And really start putting pieces around. And it sounds like there could be, a few AAA kids coming in as well. And so you start adding those pieces together, and there's potential to work with there in West, I think. And then you couple that with a coaching staff like that with Jason Fernsler, Anthony Palumbo, Zach Bargy. That's a staff that can pull some strings, play matchups, kind of take advantage of last change when you're the home team, really put kids in the best position to win. And I don't just mean win the game. I mean win the defensive zone face-off and get a puck out. I mean win the shift, getting your third line out there against an opposing line that they can be successful against. Those things matter and can make a huge difference. So I think you've got enough pieces there in Traverse City West and a smart enough coaching staff to pick and play matchups and do some of that, AJ Hinch type stuff on the bench there for the Titans. Excuse me. So 6 of their 11 wins last season actually came against teams ranked ahead of them according to My Hockey Rankings. Which is a pretty obscure, pretty wild stat when you think about more than half of their wins coming against teams that were essentially they were underdogs in. That's pretty impressive and kind of illustrates that point, like I said, about just really tactical, smart coaches with players capable of executing too and implementing a game plan. So I think that's pretty impressive. Not. Excuse me, let me start over. I wouldn't put it past this team to play inspired hockey in big rivalry games against Central again, right? They proved to do that last season. Won one game, played the other one pretty tight. Could they play inspired hockey against an Alpena on a fluky Wednesday night type of conference game like that too? So I think West has the capability to kind of make things a little bit messy in the Big North as well. You look at Cadillac. Cadillac lost a lot. Gaylord lost a lot. Even some expected returners who have gone on to different avenues of hockey. Petoskey, I got to get eyes on Anderson Ward this fall. He was one of the highest scoring freshmen in the state last season. and did so from the blue line. Him and Madden Pateman. I think they could. I think Petoskey could have both goalies back this season too, with Evan Kring and Nick Tim. So still may end up being kind of a middle of the pack type team in the Big North, but anytime you get major contributors like that back offensively, and then you got two goalies coming back in net, like you just never know. So, what kind of off seasons did these kids have, and growth spurts and wild things like that? Are they capable of kind of taking that next step in their development after having a strong outing last winter? Petoskey is one team I'm particularly curious about. I think this season too. So I'll have to make a point of it to catch a game or two and check out this Anderson Ward kid for sure. So uh, more thoughts on the Big North available, obviously at pdspicks.com. The link to the article is in the description below, as is the other two conference previews as well. I should have complete projected standings for the Big North Conference and all the other conferences we've talked about here on the podcast on my Instagram. So be sure to follow me there and check those out as well. Okay, we'll keep things moving here a little bit. We'll go further north in the Michigan map. We'll go to the UP, and we'll dive into the 7-team Great Lakes Conference real quick. Give me a half second here to catch my breath. So I had talked about Jackson Lumen Christie, the champion of the South Central Hockey League, I believe on last week's episode of the podcast, and how the defending champ had actually left the conference and filed to be an independent in Michigan high school hockey. Similar situation here in the Great Lakes Conference, as Houghton, your defending GLC champion, has actually opted for the independent route as well. So that leaves a vacant title atop the Great Lakes Conference, which makes things pretty interesting and pretty wide open here, I think, in the UP. I wrote, I think on the blog, the conferences might have a bit of a Game of Thrones type feel to it, with the reigning champ taken out of the equation, could lead to a wide open race to the throne for teams like Calumet and Hancock, Escanaba, even Jeffers. I think has a real strong camp after having a real strong campaign last winter. Even Kingsford, like they didn't have much depth and a pretty short bench, as I recall. But I liked guys like Gavin Moore and Jake Crockford, Will Mervich. They were all nice offensive options, I thought, last season, who are eligible to return this season too. So that's a team who you never know. Do they add a couple pieces this offseason? Do they bring in a stud goalie you didn't know about type stuff? And so with a team like Kingsford in particular, who has some of those nice pieces, could turn into a sneaky contender there in the Great Lakes. But with all that said, I think for anyone to claim the top spot in the conference, they're going to have to go through Marquette in some way or another, and that won't be an easy task. Marquette graduated 10 seniors last spring, and actually lost, I believe, their top D-man as well. So there's some holes to fill in the lineup for Coach Doug Garrow, but this program is no stranger to turnover year to year. And Garrow is your coach's favorite coach, is the best way I can put it. He's one of the good ones who for sure knows what he's doing in a lot of different aspects of coaching, whether it's chalk talk, whether it's scheduling, whether it's coaching kids up and executing a good practice, running a good bench during games. A lot of different aspects of coaching he excels at just about all of them. So with all that in mind, he's no stranger to kind of reloading or having to bounce back after losing a big senior class. That's nothing new to him. So you couple that with, you should still have Cole Kelly back in net. You should still have your leading scorer back and Brody Sheldon, and you still got my guy Seth Sandstrom. I love that kid. So there's a lot of reasons to believe Marquette will still be very successful this season. There's two teams in the Great Lakes that I think could make significant jumps from last year to this year, and that being Calumet and Escanaba, and I'll get into each one of those as to why. Calumet won just 7 games last season, but that total could as much as double, I think, in 24-25. They could have as many as 18 guys back from last season's squad, which is wild. And I look at Calumet under a similar lens as Traverse City Central that I was talking about earlier. They went through some growing pains last winter, and they'll once again be a young team a year later. But having that experience playing against Trenton, Howell, Brighton, playing in the MIHL showcase, uh, this was the other thing. Did you know the Copper Kings played a top 10 toughest schedule in the state last season? That blew my mind. So you do that with only 2 seniors on your roster, too. Like, talk about potentially reaping the benefits of that experience and having so many returners coming back that have played one of the toughest schedules that our league has our league our sport has to offer, essentially, at the high school hockey level. Brendan Boberg, Nathan Londo, Liam Pomeroy, Eric Locus. If these guys have made even marginal improvements to their game this offseason, on top of the experience of competition they faced last season, the Copper Kings could be a real problem, I think, for people statewide this winter. Only question mark for me is in goal. You lose Hunter Niemi. He graduated. He played 25 of 26 games last season for the Copper Kings. That's tough for anybody to replace, right? So there's some question marks there. Do they have a goalie waiting in the wings? What's the situation going to look like in net? Only time will tell. But like I said, I really like a lot of the other pieces, a lot of the experience they have coming in that should really help propel that team throughout this winter. I mentioned Escanaba earlier too. I wrote in the blog on pdspicks.com. The Eskimos may very well have the best forward in the conference with Graham Johnson, the best defenseman in the conference in Nolan Bink, and potentially the best goalie in the conference as well in Cully Hayes. Those are 3 guys I've been high on for over a year now. Really like their games, really like the way they play and the impact that they can have at their respective positions. It's all debatable, don't get me wrong. There's cases to be made for other players and for other goalies in the league. But to even have guys in consideration at all 3 levels of the lineup is pretty impressive. Could they factor in to the Great Lakes Conference Championship? The only problem that I could see for Escanaba is just depth. A couple games I watched last season, low on numbers, which is something you can't always control. But that coupled with injuries and sicknesses and things like that, the couple games I watched them, I think they only had 10 skaters and 1 goalie. Like, that's tough. It's tough sledding for anybody, right? So I think if they're able to add some depth or even just stay healthy for long enough stretches, this season could be night and day different from what it was last winter. And a lot of those variables are a little bit out of your control, right? You can't necessarily control whether the flu runs through your locker room or not, or whether someone gets injured in practice. Like, those are um, factors you can't necessarily control or dictate. So you're kind of at the mercy of the hockey gods there. But like I said, if the tides can turn a little bit for them, Escanaba could make significant improvements as well from last season. They finished a game under 500, lost 6 of those games by 2 goals or fewer. Put that into perspective a little bit. You got half a dozen games with a bounce here, a bounce there that could have been completely flipped. And now you're a dominant force with 15, 16, 18 wins on the season as opposed to being a sub 500 team. How much of that can just be attributed to just running out of gas down the stretch too? You've got top producers on this team that I mentioned earlier, but you've also got some contributors like Cale Carter and Owen Labonte, who I think, you get those guys back as well. That adds a little bit more depth or secondary scoring options. They've got enough top end guys to go top versus top against almost anyone in the state. But like I said, it just kind of comes back to that depth for me. And are you able to, um, and not in the sense that, your second and third line guys aren't good or good enough. It's just, do you have second and third line guys to speak of? And I don't obviously don't mean that as a shot at the Eskimos there, but like I said, it's just pure logistics if you have enough bodies or not is what it comes down to. But top guys are as good as anybody, and last season I was a pretty big Escanaba fan. I'm going to be an Escanaba fan again this year. It's a team I've been pulling for. I'm going to continue pulling for. I'm super optimistic about their potential this season. And like I said, just one or two more guys could make a excuse me, huge difference for this Escanaba team. So I got to talk about Hancock here too, real quick, before I wrap things up on the Great Lakes Conference. They graduated, I think, 10 seniors, but four of their top six scorers were underclassmen last season. Tevin Stukel has had a strong offseason. You've heard me talk about him a bunch on the podcast in the last few weeks. Top scorer Todd Capella is gone as well. That's unfortunate. But let me throw some other names out at you too. Jackson Sinkowski. He's a big-bodied kid as a junior who produced, I believe, at a point per game clip last season. I really liked Brady Axford last season as well. He was on my 2024 all-freshman team to end the season last March. Max Heinonen is a nice defenseman. Simple but effective approach to the game that I like a lot, and that not enough defensemen do at this level either. Both goalies graduated, so again, there's a bit of a hole in net, which puts them in the same boat as Calumet. But I just think this conference is something to be excited about this season. In particular, like I said, because of the vacancy at the top, because of a lot of these teams, at the very least, have a solid first line. Even looking at your Kingsfords and Jeffers of the bunch, there's some real nice top end talent and high level prospects in this conference. High level coaches. And with the conference just being wide open for the taking, I think anything could happen this winter, and I'm here for it too. Like I said, there's a lot of teams I like in this particular conference, but Escanaba right now has my heart. But Marquette is the pick, I think, this year in the Great Lakes Conference. Okay, so I'm going to move on here to the Saginaw Valley League. We'll wrap things up with them. Let's see here. Final conference of this particular episode. We'll get into the SVL. I was looking at their league Instagram account, and the bio says 120 years of scholastic sports. Now that's not hockey specific. That's all high school sports. But is that legit? Is it really been around for 120 years? Have I just been living under a rock this long in the state? That's got to make the SVL one of the oldest high school leagues in the country, let alone the state, right? So that's pretty wild. But if anyone wants to provide some feedback on that, I'd appreciate some insight into that. That'd be pretty cool. So I got to admit, I've probably been sleeping on the SVL a little bit in recent years. I remember I got a message from Coach JJ Bamberger after last year's preview. I had made a few comments about Saginaw Heritage. Maybe being a bit of an underdog, or maybe just overlooking their body of work in the last few seasons. And he called me out, and I appreciate the hell out of it, honestly, because he was right. And so that just kind of stuck with me this whole time. And it wasn't just Heritage. It was the Midland schools. It was Bay City. It was even Flint Powers to a degree, that I just kind of had to check myself and found myself kind of sleeping on the teams in this conference. But let me put the SVL into perspective for a minute, because this is kind of what woke me up or opened my eyes to it too. Flint Powers has won 4 consecutive league titles. In that time, they won a state title as recently as 2023. Midland Dow won a state title in 2022. Saginaw Heritage and Midland both won regional championships last March. And then on top of that, Bay City was arguably one of the hottest teams in high school hockey last season, as that program, kind of continues to climb the state ranks. And that's a big shout out to my guy, Zach Schock there. Keep up the good work, buddy. I appreciate it. And celebrating from afar. Gotta love it. These aren't just competitive programs within the league. They are forces to be reckoned with statewide. and that to me is pretty impressive. So with all that said, I won't be sleeping on the SVL anymore. I'm wide awake, and geared up for this season. So let's start with we'll start with Flint Powers, defending champs here, and likely your favorites to win it again this year. It's one of those things where you're on this run. You've been the top dog for a number of years now. You're the top dog until you're not the top dog. Someone else has got to come prove it. So likely your odds-on favorite to win yet again this season. But we'll get more into that in the picks and predictions a little bit later on. Aiden Cook was the team's leading scorer as a sophomore last season, a monster year with 49 points in 27 games for the Chargers. More recently, though, he's had a tremendous fall season with the MHA Red. I believe he's the leading scorer on that team as well, and that team is ranked number 1 in the state among 18U AAA teams. So he's had a strong sophomore season that's snowballed into a very productive offseason as well, which kind of sets the stage for an even better junior season. And his supporting cast could look a little bit different this winter, though. 9 seniors gone, including top performers Brendan Sly, Nolan Berner, Caleb Dahl, as well as goalie Blake Zlotto. Zlotto? Sorry, buddy. But with all that said, Coach Travis Perry has a lot of holes to fill in the lineup as well, similar to the Marquette situation we were talking about a minute ago. But again, this isn't Travis Perry's first rodeo and having to reload and keep moving on the fly. I know there's a few new faces we could expect to see in the mix that are pretty promising, but we'll wait for the dust to settle on those decisions in November before kind of speculating too much. But the bottom line is with guys like Cook, Andrew Parmentier, Andrew Burney, Parker Bendall, all those guys were point per game producers a year ago. So the Chargers will still be in good shape, even despite losing a large graduating class. The problem, we'll call it a quote unquote problem with the SVL, if you want to call it that, is that you only play opposing teams in your league once all season. You get one shot. That structure, I think, is a little bit different than other conferences of a similar size around the state. And, on one hand, it frees up your schedule quite a bit to load up on top level non-conference games. You can go out and challenge some of the top 10 teams. You can go to a bunch of showcases that are super competitive. That's good. But conversely, in league play, if you lose a league game to Midland or Bay City, those implications could be crippling down the stretch because you only get that one shot. And if you end up in a tie-breaking situation, the tie is going to go to the winner of the head-to-head. So hockey is a funny game too. It gets even more bizarre at the youth levels, like high school hockey. A bounce doesn't go your way. Maybe a goalie had a bad day at school. Teams get caught overlooking an opponent on a random Tuesday night league game. Like something so small could be the difference when you've only got one game head to head. That could easily be the difference in the standings. So I think that gap between powers in the field has closed a little bit, and I know I said that last year. Said that last year too, and then they went on to outscore SVL opponents 44-8 in league play. So I'm probably wrong, but I could be right too. So we'll wait and see on that one. Just looking at both Midland schools too, for instance, the Chemics have a legit 1-2 punch in Lucas Mankoff and Cade Sanborn. Both were exceptional or have been exceptional in the MDHL this fall. Mankoff even led the league in scoring. That is no easy feat to do. One is grit, one is finesse. I think that's a good combination of style and sandpaper there. And I think they balance each other out pretty well to provide a pretty solid offensive attack. Andrew Partapillo back in net as well. He was a freshman last season, playing in 17 games. One of which was a 45 save performance against Flint Powers. Could he work some magic again this season? That would be a pretty big upset, Midland had some pretty nice building blocks coming back, so it's, will they have enough firepower to get one over on Powers. Time will tell. Dow is kind of on a similar trajectory. Right across the road, three of their top four scorers should be back from last season: Nolan Harris, Caden Nemeth, Zane Rastelow. Harris was an undeniable force in the MDHL. You've heard me talk about him on a couple episodes now. Um, at coming out of tryouts, he was one who I kind of wrote off initially, and then he scored, and he scored again, and then he made a big play, and then he made another big play, and I'm like, all right, I can't deny this kid anymore. Like he just he demands your attention. So he's a force. Nemeth, Rastelow, those are guys who have been involved in spring and summer, spring and fall hockey, and have played at a pretty high level too. Um, the problem, I think, for both Midland and Dow, I believe both will have to go to Flint Powers this season for their respective SBL matchups. After Powers made two trips to the Midland Civic Arena last winter. So if you're doing home and homes correctly, I believe both schools would end up going to Powers. So not only do you have to beat the defending champ, who's been top dog for a long time, you also have to do it in their rink, in their building. That is no easy feat. Um, so that definitely makes for a big challenge, uphill fight for sure. Okay, preseason though, Logan Boettcher should probably be in the conversation for Player of the Year in the SBL, and I don't even know if that's a thing. I'm probably making it up, but Boettcher should absolutely be in that conversation as we get nearer to puck drop. He was kind of the talk of the D2 Final Four last March, playing hero hockey for the Hawks in the semifinal against eventual state champion Byron Center. In a losing effort, man, Boettcher was extremely impressive in that game. His performance was similar to Roman Seiko's for Cranbrook in the D3 final. Both of those guys' performances are kind of burned in my memory for the way they literally left it all out there. Like it was very evident from the stands watching that game. Heritage was down 4-0. But Boettcher was going to do everything in his power to give his team a chance in that one. And it was really, really inspiring to watch, to be honest with you. He'd go on to score 2 goals in that game and really took control of the play at times and really exerted his dominance. So it was really impressive to see. If that type of mentality or that impact on the game rolls over to this season, Boettcher could garner a lot of statewide recognition as well, if he hasn't already. The Hawks also have Landon Hayward coming back in net. He's a guy I've been high on for a while. You've heard me talk about him a couple times as well. He's an 09 with a season of varsity hockey under his belt. He had a good fall campaign with MHA, which is still in the midst right now. You got Hayward and Trevor Selk. They were basically a 50-50 split there in net. You could have both of those guys coming back this winter. That's pretty advantageous, to say the least. So there's a couple teams, I've talked about on the pod with a pair of goalies coming back from last season to this season. Man, it's such a luxury to have. It really lets you take a breath for a minute while you sort out defensive pairs and you implement forechecking strategies, to know that you've got two guys who, at the very least, have been there before. And been through the process. It makes the rest of your coaching and implementing and strategies that much easier. And speaking of returning goalies, we probably got to talk about maybe the best one in the SVL. Nash Leonard is set to return for Bay City. You got a goalie, you got a chance. That's kind of the mantra in hockey. And the Wolves have been kind of climbing the state ranks year over year over year under Coach Zach Schock, and it's really should be a case study for how to build a program within Michigan high school hockey. It's really been done the right way, I think. They lost top scorer Gunnar Weber to graduation last spring, and I think the assumption maybe is after losing a graduating class that was so impactful, Bay City's fun run is kind of over. And I don't think that's going to be the case here. Still, you still got Leonard in net. You still got Lucas Neiman. You still got Sean Daly. You still got Andrew Kazmarchik. Like, I think last season with Weber and with Caleb Anthony and that senior class was a tone setter for this program. I think those underclassmen from last season's team kind of learned from those seniors and saw what it takes to compete at a high level and hopefully are hungry for more. So, I think Bay City kind of continues to ascend the state rankings, continues to build towards being a real contender in high school hockey under Coach Schock. And I think, doing it the right way. The next mountain to climb for Bay City is hardware, boys. A league championship or a regional championship or any type of championship. Let's put some hardware in the trophy case this year, boys. That's the next hurdle. Bring home a title. So, okay. Powers, I think, is the obvious favorite to win in the SVL yet again. But I'm hopeful that one of these contenders that I had mentioned before can make a good push to kind of turn the tides here in the SVL. Excuse me. I'll go out on a bit of a limb here and I'll take Midland's dynamic duo to get it done. They got a lot of guys coming back, like I mentioned, experience in net, young experience, but experience nonetheless. It'll be an uphill fight, like I mentioned, but give me the Chemics to get it done. And if it's not the Chemics, then give me the Chargers to take down the Chargers. And if it's not the Chargers, give me the Wolves to take down Flint Powers. And if it's not the Wolves, then give me the Hawks. Someone's got to take down the top dogs here in this conference. But okay. All right. That is it for this week's pod. We've talked about a lot of top players, a lot of teams to watch this upcoming season. Be sure to go back and check out some of our previous episodes, the podcast, to dive into some of the other conferences. We've also got a couple more coming up. We'll get into the Metro League and the OKC on next week's episode. So be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple and Spotify. Helps me out a ton. And then that way you can stay on top of when I post the next episodes to talk about those conferences and players. So it's a win-win. On top of that, CCM Motown is this weekend. 2 games getting underway right now at the time of taping anyways. So maybe we can recap some action from that tournament as well. MHA, all 3 age levels are in action. MDHL 15s and 16s are in action. You've also got a lot of AAA teams, other AAA teams, I should say, in the state of Michigan. Big B, I believe, at a couple levels. Bell Tire at a couple levels. OJG at a couple levels. I think there's a couple more too. So we maybe we can touch on that as well. So, all right. That's it for this one. We're rolling, man. We are 2 weeks away from the season getting underway. That blew my mind when I started piecing the timeline together. We are getting down to it, and I can't wait. So, till next time, skate hard, have fun. I'll see you at the rink soon.